So the goals of this tool, this collaborative ecosystem mapping tool, is to give us a way to understand how we can design or influence the things that are in the environment that help teams work together well, right? And when we can see what we can design or what can be influenced, then maybe we can then prioritize what to improve. Ideally today, after you walk out of our 90-minute time together, you'll have at least one area that you are intrigued by and motivated to dive deeper into. You say, okay, you know what? I'm going to go meet somebody who is an expert in that part of the system. And I'm going to make that part of the system awesome for me or the teams that I work for. Here's the plan. We're going to talk a little bit about how teamwork is changing and why this perspective might be valuable now. We're going to talk to each other because one of the things I find when I work with every team is that when you're clear about what you can influence, everyone in the room has an idea about how to go about doing it and have seen it done well somewhere. So how do you unlock that? Then we'll look at the layers of the ecosystem itself, share some stories, and wrap it up with some resources. All right, let me pop in and make sure I can see all the things. Okay, thanks. So let's talk about how teamwork is changing. You know, it's in some ways becoming more complex than ever. And then, of course, everybody says this every generation when they sort of wake up to the complexity of being human. But in our case, in this moment in time, there are a lot of different factors that are going on that are kind of throwing us in a hard spot. This is from the US, and it's a graph about public trust in government. And with public trust in government being at historic lows, what that tells us in our US companies, and I know this is not a US only phenomenon, right? The global rifts between political parties, between different nationalities and whatnot are very high and very tense right now. It means that people who walk into our companies and our teams are not culturally unified. Right? We've got people who are from believing in different politicians, who are believing in different cultural values, all of those things that are coming into our teams, which means they're not starting at the same set of assumptions about how we treat each other, about what's good, about many things. So it's a little more culturally fractured than we have been in the past, which is a challenge for collaboration. And then beyond just, some of the larger cultural things, their career path may not have been the same kind of career path you could have assumed in the past, where, you got hired in one place and then you got elevated and then you worked your way up the corporate ladder and you kind of assumed, oh yeah, that person's been with GE for 20 years. I kind of know something about them. Like, no, folks are taking wonderful squiggly careers. Where we work has radically changed. Hi, Brian. We're, the rise of hybrid work. This graph is I think 4 months old, which means it's changed even more since then, where, you can't necessarily depend on where your team's going to be, and that the advice we see that comes from, like, say, the Fortune 50 rarely applies to the 2 and 3 and 20 and 50 and 100-person companies. So you've got some radical differences there. And then tech, right? So by the end of 2024, it's assumed that companies will have between 72 and 175,000 different tech tools they could be choosing from. This includes AI. And that's radically different. So when you used to come into a company in 2015, the average enterprise used 8 different SaaS tools, 8 different tech tools in their team, right? They had a word processor, an email, and a calendar, and maybe a way to meet, maybe. And now the average company uses, well, it's more than 130 because this data is pre-AI, right? Number of meetings as a consequence has risen dramatically during the lockdown. We saw it peak over 100. What is that? Million? Is that? It's a hell of a lot of meetings per day in the US. I don't have data for the globe, but the global rise was similar. And then you've got all these tech, you've got all this stuff you're switching between, you're not sure whether you're in the office or out of the office, all kinds of different ways to communicate, and that fractures people's time. So this is a pretty common focus interruption graph from Workalytics. They do sort of that detailed spyware kind of analytics on people's computers. And that's what it looks like in the collaborative world right now. So with all of these opportunities to walk in the door without shared job history experience, without shared cultural experience, with 75,000 tools to pick between, you're not quite sure where you are, and meeting on your calendar, the opportunity for our teams to drift, right? To become misaligned, to just go and get stuff done without talking to people because, oh my gosh, what else am I going to do? That opportunity for drift and crack is really high. I'm curious, are these trends you're seeing too, or are you working in organizations that are totally stable? I see a thumb. Any comments on any of this from anyone? Revenue, yeah, right. And feel free to unmute if you want at any point. Um, yeah, the revenue's dropping, layoffs. Right. So not only is the is the team the dealing with all of these things, but leadership has not gotten better at like reducing their priorities. They haven't gotten better at saying, hey, we've got fewer people and everything's complex, so let's just focus on two things this term. I don't think so. And who thinks it's going to get better, right? Like their fortune cookie says we're about to enter a decade of unprecedented calm and stability. Yeah, not so much. So what do we do? Well, uh, yeah, we can ignore it. Um, we can we can believe, we can take a positive attitude and believe it better, or we can trust. And where teams put a lot of their trust to have figure all this stuff out is your local business consulting company. I'm definitely in this loop, just like 3+ million other business consulting companies around the world right now. And that's an important helping bridging step. Yeah, generational differences, right? And those are different. I mean, those are really big now because the generations have grown up with radically different senses of how to navigate all of this. So that's our foundational landscape. Now, short version, teamwork is changing, right? That doesn't need to be a build. I'll fix that later. So the question is, what do we do about it? Well, the thing that I find every time I talk to teams is that they know already a bunch of this. And I think this is probably true for you all too. So I'm just going to ask a couple questions and, raise your hand, put a note in the chat. But is anybody here currently on a team or working with a team? Okay, a couple of folks. How do you know? What counts as a team?
Elise, I'll chime in. Hi, everyone. I'm Amanda. And I am actually a coach for teams, usually focused on collaboration and culture of the team. Uh, I think there's a difference between some teams think that they're a team because they always come together at the same time on Monday, bi-weekly, and they have traditions that make them seem like they're a team. And when we try and unpack that, I try to help them see like where do we have shared work and shared sort of objective. So there has to be some purpose for us coming together that is about the fact that we all need to contribute to achieving something. And that can be achieving an objective, a revenue objective, or it can be achieving something about the culture in the organization. But without like shared work, I don't know why people are coming together, but they continue to come together without even understanding how their work is shared, is what I'm seeing.
Shared habits, right?
Yes.
Does anybody have a different answer than shared work? I think that's a pretty good one. Okay. Well, feel free to ponder that, and if you do, go ahead and pop up. Anybody here on more than one team? I am. Yeah, yeah. Allie is. Uh, okay, so that's really common, especially if you work in big companies, right? So we can do all of this work to help a team gel. And yet the average employee in a big company works on between 5 and 8 different teams at the same time, which is a lot of teams, right? And they're not all the same kind of team, like Amanda was talking about. Some of them, collaborate a lot. They do project and task focused work. So you get the team that's on that initiative that's going to do that campaign or do that product release or whatever. And some of them are doing really heavy duty innovation work. But some of the other teams are actually just kind of functional groups that get together and share ideas, right? The entire finance department may not be working on the same parts of the financing picture, but they share practices. And then some people talk about being on teams that are really like committees, you know, that group I'm going through the training with, the things like this, a loose affiliation, a community of practice, so there are different kinds of teams with different needs in terms of how their work is structured. So has anybody here ever been on a team that struggled? Yeah, and you're right, Wolfgang, that might be a rhetorical question almost. So what was one challenge that you ran into? What's one problem that you've encountered in a team that really sticks with you? I see all kinds of stuff in the chat. Poor communication, unclear purpose, right? Yeah. Lack of resources. That's so hard. And you've got a clear purpose and you know what you're doing and you can't get it done because you can't afford it and there's nothing to work with. Wow, look at all this stuff. Meandering meetings, not knowing who made the decision or who can make a decision or when they made a decision or why they made a decision. Oh my goodness. So on the same token, has anybody been on a team that felt great? Yeah? What made it feel great? Yes. The opposite of all of the above. Okay. Okay. Um, so so I want you to take a moment and compare notes and kind of understand where each other are coming from because when we come back later and we're looking at these different design elements, time, inclusiveness, communication, all of that, I want you to have a sense of the experience in the room because these are really wonderful things and they're all so fuzzy high level. Great meetings, purpose, they're pretty generic. So I'm going to put you into some groups of 2 to 3, um, just to share some stories about a team where things worked really well and what that looked like in practice. And then some idea about something you'd like to improve for a team that you know of now. So give me a second to put those together. Any questions before we go and we have a chance to talk to each other? Okay. And I'll put the instructions in the chat again here in a second so that it can follow you. And you've got 6 minutes to compare notes. All right, have fun. We got 2 seconds. There they come. Here comes everybody.
I left my meeting prematurely because I clicked on the thing that said we only had 28 more seconds left, and it kicked me out of the meeting.
28 seconds is so long sometimes, isn't it?
Yeah, but
we missed
and I was
you.
going, I was going to say something profound, and Katarina and Wolfgang will never hear it.
Well, actually, if there were profundities in your breakout, this is exactly the time to say them. I would love to hear what
You can
profound
tell it
insights
now.
you developed.
I'm sure Elise
Yeah.
will give you 28 seconds.
No, I was being sarcastic. I was just going to say that the meetings that worked well for me had a lot of positivity and very clear purpose, or not meetings, teams is what we were discussing. And that's all I was going to say. Not anything profound at all.
Positivity is so profound. Positivity rocks. Were there any insights or ahas or common themes that came out in that discussion that you think the group would benefit from hearing?
Sorry, I'm one of those people who's like, okay, I'm not going to leave Elise hanging. So I always jump in. I had the pleasure of talking to Brian, and it was interesting because Brian described being on a team that was like really high functioning. And when I asked him, like, how did it get that way? He was like, I guess I don't know. Right. It was this organic way over time of building. Whereas the reason I was asking that is because I'm trying to help teams jumpstart that. Like, we don't have time for organic over time. What are the things that we can do so that we can help you to get there faster? And then one thing that I think, so we talked a little bit about, knowing what my unique contribution is. But then one thing Brian also said was, I also like we had common interests outside of work, right? And so we could talk about those as well, which made me think, okay, which also is the importance of like a check-in round or like getting to know your people personally so that you can say, hey, did you see that band that we have in common is playing this weekend? I'm going to go see them, right? So that there's that other way to bond outside of the actual work too, which I thought is really important.
Really important. And, based on all the things we've seen happen societally, where we are, our foundational differences in terms of our backgrounds, our experiences, our political beliefs, the media we consume, finding those common threads is more challenging and probably more important than it ever was, because you could kind of assume some of them in the past in a way you just can't anymore. Cool insight. Well, if you're trying to find those things and you're trying to help teams, then that makes you what I think of as a waymaker. So it's the word I've been sort of centering around recently, and maybe it's useful to you and maybe it's not, but I think of you all as waymakers, which is somebody who's looking at a complex landscape and going, okay, what's going on here? And how can I help my team find a way through it, right? In a way that gets that team through there intact, feeling good, at the place they're trying to get to with all of this stuff going on around us. So with that, let's talk about what is in that landscape in a very simple way. And I have a canvas for you. Again, this is V1. And I want to acknowledge first and foremost that it's a radical oversimplification on purpose, right? Because if we were going to map the universe, That does not leave you any room to write on it. There's no blank space if we map the universe. So it's intentionally oversimplified, so we have something to work with. But let's talk about what's going on here. Go. Okay. So at the outside of this map, we have this dotted line. And the dotted line represents the organization, right? Organizations of every kind exist. And by declaring yourself an organization or a team, you create some expectations and some boundaries. You know, people are either in it or they're outside of it. And the organizations exist to take input and intent. So, you know, mission, values, strategy, raw material, and turn it into something, right? Products, experiences, capabilities, change in the universe, whatever. And that's at the organizational level, the mission, the journey, a straight line. Hey, we're going to launch products that, you know, solve the water crisis, and products that solve the water crisis come out the other side. Of course, it's a porous boundary because organizations are influenced by the culture they live in, the macroeconomic environments, their markets, the actual environment, all of that kind of thing. So it's not an actual boundary, it's a conceptual boundary. But within it, we say, okay, we're going to go from here to here, and it's people who do the going from there to there. People take actions and do things. And you know, theoretically, they would just, okay, great, I'm going to take the things from here and walk them out the door, and hooray, we've solved the water crisis. But of course, it's how they go from there to there might be a little more squiggly, or it might be a lot more squiggly, where things come in from the side and they get stuck going around in circles. Or, you know, it might make sense, but only if you've traveled the maze a number of times. I think of this as the government bureaucracy kind of version of getting things done. And it might just be a total mess. So rather than just trusting every individual to figure that out on their own, we create teams. And teams make work meaningful. So that thing you were talking about, the clarity of shared purpose, it's teams that tell people how what they are individually doing makes sense in the context of an organization that's trying to go from these inputs to these outputs. And meaning, Ashley Goodall had a nice way of putting this. He said it's knowing how you fit in and feeling confident that your work has value. And that meaning connecting is one of the signature contributions of teams. So, of course, teams are in reality super messy, right? Like we draw them as these nice little cohesive bubbles on the org chart, but they actually look a lot more like this. So this is if you haven't seen these before, this is an organizational network analysis diagram, which shows pockets of how people actually interact. And you can see, and all of the different colors are different teams. So, you know, this is the green team. Let's say that's marketing. And, you know, there are a couple green people way over here, and there's some green people way over here, even though that's the marketing team, for example. Every once in a while, you get a red person way out there all by themselves. What does that mean? So going from input to intent to the outcomes. Here's how teams help with that meaning making. Let's say the mission is to provide aid to children in need, and the desired impact, the output is children who are fed and secure and cared for. And your task is to update the accounting software. Yeah. It's not the organization's job. It's not the CEO's job to help you understand why that's a meaningful task. That happens at the team level. Can somebody kind of chime in? How would updating the account software help children get fed?
Well, it's one of those, you need to have the infrastructure to keep the organization running, and especially in nonprofits, it's not magical gnomes that do the work, but it's still people and, you know, working on the platform of infrastructure, raising money, et cetera, et cetera. So you also need something like accounting software.
Right on. Yeah, Allie.
If you had better accounting software that let you know better how you were using your resources, you could figure out where it's actually not helping your impact.
Right
Money
on.
as an indicator of effort, and yeah.
Cool. So and it could be a number of things, right? Like it could be that those are the reasons that has to happen right now. But that meaning making, that clarity of how what you do attaches to what you're meant to be achieving at the higher purpose level, that happens at the team level. So we spend a lot of time as consultants and business folks focusing on organizational purpose and the messaging and the purpose washing of our messaging to teams. But that actual meaning, how what I do matters, is happening at the team level. So organizations set that high level action, teams, and they use mission, strategy, management systems, etc. Teams have plans and rituals and agreements that help them figure out how they work together, and then the individuals act. And the mission is to create an environment that makes it easy and natural for all of those actions to happen in known good ways. So how do we create an environment where everybody who's acting can connect to the meaning of their action and do their actions in known good ways? And then that raises the question, which is, okay, so what in that environment can be designed? Because a whole lot of it is, interactions, like the messy network graph of people figuring things out and moving sort of fluidly as they try and get stuff done. So there's a lot of stuff we can't actually design, but I believe there are 6 core areas that we can design that deserve our focus. And this is the bigger version of looking at what those look like. And we'll walk through each one of them in turn. As we look at them, for every one of these areas, the environment, the teams, how we organize our work, etc., there are some parts of it that can be enforced, which means that at an organization or team level, you are saying, this is how we do it. And if it is not done this way, we will correct that. So an example of an enforced way of working might be a harassment policy, right? If the way we work is kind and respectful and doesn't, invite people to have sex with us in a closet. And if you violate that, that's corrected, from a very simple example. Many of the things that we do are not enforced, but they're facilitated, right? So you say, let's put water. You want everybody to be well hydrated. You put access to easy water and water bottles fill stations throughout your office. You're not forcing them to drink water, but you're making that easy. And then anything that isn't thought of and designed in the environment is left up to teams and people to figure out on their own. You have essentially delegated all of those decisions to the people, which is not necessarily a bad thing, right? But not necessarily useful either if they happen to be making those decisions in ways that are running them in circles. So before we dive into the specific sections, any thoughts or comments about this framing or questions?
So in the delegated undefined, is that where we would find things that are allowed but not mandated?
I think that's where you'd find things where the organization hasn't said anything or the team leader hasn't said anything. So let's think about the way most managers run their meetings, right? They pick how they're going to run their meeting based on what they saw a manager do before them, or what they learned in high school or whatever, right? So that's a delegated decision. You know, do you run it once a week? Do you not? Do other people get to talk? Do they not? You know, all of those things, you leave it up to the managers and the individuals to figure out on their own. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yes, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. You know what? I want to stretch. Y'all want to stretch for a second? This is my favorite new slide. We've been talking for a little bit. And it's like this whole sequence of things we can do when we've been sitting for too long so that we don't hurt ourselves. I think the floor is meant to be shoulder rubs, but it might be shrugs. Who knows? And if anybody can help me find the attribution for this graphic, I would love it. It was I found it on like a chiropractor's website. And then I found it on 5 other chiropractors' websites. Oh. Ah. I felt better. Yay, stretch. Yay, stretch slide. Okay, so what can you design? Let's work through these one level at a time. And I've ordered these in the order that I think they get addressed sort of naturally by people in leadership positions. So at the base level, we have the environment itself, right? We have the physical environment itself. So that is the office, if you have an office, the room you're in, etc., and the tools that you select. There are actually fabulous resources about how to design both of those things to allow collaborative freedom and to encourage different values, different ways of being, different ways of thinking, without creating all kinds of confusion. So for example, on the digital side, Asana did some really good research about how many collaborative digital tools most teams need. And they found that the answer was 6. Like there were 6 core tools that every team needed, and that some teams needed some more, but every one that you added after 6 became a potential area for friction, right? So the 6 being things like a shared calendar and a shared way to do collaborative documents, and a way to run meetings, etc. And then everything past that, let's say you're designers, are you using Figma or the Adobe Suite or whatever? If the team's using different things and not settling and agreeing on it, you're losing time. So these are some areas in the environment that are pretty important to be clear on and to design. Any questions about the collaborative environment? If any of you work in physical offices, there is a wonder world of cool stuff that you can do in the physical office to create different impacts. Katarina.
I was just gonna say, I think I had epiphany yesterday. We were in a team meeting. Again, I'm a little bit questioning if that is really a team, but it was hybrid. And it was really painful, although because there was really quite a number of people, and then we were also working with the Miro, and it wasn't clear, are people going to look at it, on their individual computers or on the big screen? And there actually was the proper setup. So I'm actually even thinking, for these kinds of meetings, I think I'm totally against hybrid. Either everybody is on the computer or I had that epiphany already during COVID, but it was just driven home again yesterday because I kept having kind of that neck, looking at my computer, looking at the
Right.
people, looking at the screen. Oh, it was horrible.
Yeah. And that kind of thing, that like dissonance, that friction in the collaborative experience does impact your ability to do good work, right? Allie, did you have a question or thought on this one too? Okay. Yeah, if you're interested in the physical environment, I suggest following Miller Knoll. And Google's got a really good work experience lab that's doing some really great stuff here. Mike Palmer. I probably don't need to see your whole name the whole time.
Probably not. Just appending to what Katharina just said, the problem I've had in some online meetings is people would use software that I don't know. And working in the meeting, you can't do it if you don't know the software, or at least I can't. So examples would be Minty or Miro. Those are fairly sophisticated, or at least Miro is sophisticated system. And the few times I've been in a meeting where that was the key technology in the meeting, I just was lost because I didn't know how to use it.
Right. So that just sort of reinforces the collaborative environment, right? Like you can use those tools, and you should if that's the kind of work that your team does, but you shouldn't use 3 or 4 of them. You should use 1 or 2, and your team needs to learn how to use it together, because you have to get, when they're just sprung on you, like I spring things on you all the time, Mike, and it's hard. When you're coming in and it's not something you played with. Cool. So that's the physical environment. Now, most organizations and teams have some of that designed. However, a lot of it tends to get designed based on factors like, when is our lease due? Where does the CEO live, and how long does it take him to drive there or her to drive there? What did we get the best Microsoft licensing deal on? As opposed to what best helps your team achieve the goals that they need to achieve. So the physical environment often has all kinds of ways that we can use it to enhance our team collaboration that we're not paying attention to. Once the physical environment's off, the next level that we get to talk about is team definition, right? What constitutes a team? And there are all kinds of ways to do this. The old school way to do it is hierarchical. You get levels, big boss, descending levels of bosses over groups of people. There are organizations that are essentially flat, where everybody is equal and they report to 1 or 2 token leaders. And then there are many other organizations that are experiencing or exploring networked ways of teaming. On the team definition front, and traditionally, what has happened is you get a job description. It tells you what you're supposed to do theoretically, although I don't know if anybody I've never had a job except for when I was doing retail and pancake waitressing, where what was on the job description and what I ended up doing matched. But you get the job description and they tell you who you report to, and that's what you do. That's one way of doing it. You can also do things like say, okay, hey, we need a team to create this result, this outcome. Come together and between yourself decide who's going to take what role. That is an entirely feasible and possible way of doing it. And there are some great companies that have been modeling these fluid, self-organizing, self-managing ways of working. If you want to get that direction, if you want to go towards self-management, one of the things that's really fascinating and sort of counterintuitive is the less mandated control you have from the organizational side, the more agreement you have, the more structure you have about how people agree on the details, right? So we're not saying, for example, let me break that down in a different way. In a self-managed group, they won't necessarily say, this is your job, this is what you do, you go here, you go there, you report to this person. You'll say, this is how you decide what your job is. This is how the team agrees on what they're going to do. They design the process that you can use to get to the outcome, not the task and the outcome. So team definition is generally something that the organization is got a way of doing. It may be unconscious. It may just be, hey, that's what I saw before, rather than examined and tuned to the needs of the organization as they are today. So there's some opportunity there. Any thoughts or questions about this before we move on? Okay.
Yeah, so just one quick thing on that. In the self-managed model, you just said the person creating the team or whoever creates the team says, here's the process for figuring out what each person on the team is going to do. And here's the goal of the team. Here's what we want the team to accomplish. And you figure out who's going to do what and how they're going to do it. That's the way that works.
Yeah, so at a really high kind of abstract level, for those kinds of ways of working, the group I would start following and looking into is Corporate Rebels. Corporate Rebels does a really good job of highlighting use cases and case studies and specific methodologies used by more self-managed, flatter organizations. So you learn about Haier, which is a large Chinese appliance manufacturing company that's gone entirely self-managed. Heiligenfeld, which is healthcare in the Dutch area. Morningstar, which is tomatoes in cans here. So there are companies that have done a really good job of this. Yeah, great. Thank you, Katarina. Link in the chat, a wonderland to explore there. And we'll actually talk about one of those companies in the story time. So the environment, we've got the teams. Then we've got what are we working on, right? The work definition itself. And again, this is something most companies have some sort of sense of how it does. So they've got, here are the goals, here are the KPIs, here's the project plans, etc. And there are all kinds of different ways you can do that planning and all kinds of different ways you can manage whether you're on task or whatnot. The professions, PMI, and all of your business consulting folks who do the OKRs and the EOS, this is their world. So lots to be done there. Any questions about this part? Because there's so much written about this. I kind of want to breeze past it. Okay. All right. So those are our bottom levels, and organizations mostly have some answers to those things. Where do we work? What tools do we use? What do our teams look like? What are we working on, and how do we track our progress? Those designs may be, and often are, adopted from places I was before and haven't necessarily been thought about. So as you work with a team and you see issues that are around trust, that are around getting stuck, sometimes there are things in these parts, in these layers, that you can shift that can improve those outcomes. Next, asynchronous collaboration. So this is all of the agreements and rituals and rules we have around how do we do text messaging, right? Who do we contact when? What channel do we use? Which messages go where? It can also be, how do we update things in our environment to signal status? So people who use Obeyas or Kanbans and things in their rooms. So there's like in the back of Amanda's wall, if they were going to take and move all those stickies around, that might be a way of asynchronously communicating status. Many organizations have tools for these things. Many teams do not go as far as they need to keep them from being noise buckets. Because this is a great opportunity to just be distracting as all get out. So the ones who are doing this best are getting very clear about which messages go where and expected response times. If you agreements about expected response times are so huge. So, if you message me in this channel, and it's a work day, you should expect an answer within an hour. if you send email, you get an answer within a day, right? Like those kinds of agreements should be clear. Things like who can see what. So the most liberated and the best async companies work transparent by default. Everybody can see everything. And they work very hard to define single sources of truth. If we are reporting status, if we're reporting this, it goes there and only there. And everybody who does it only puts it there. And every time we talk about it, we only link to it there, right? It's not, it's here and there and there and there. It's a single source of truth, clear expectations about time, very, very clear uses for different tools. Any questions about async communication?
Elise, I don't know if this is a question. Also, I can see something on your screen that's like, says second rise or something. I'm not sure.
Uh-huh.
Okay. I just didn't know if that was, oh, okay. That's like a screenshot. Okay.
It's a screenshot of Slack. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. I was like, oh, she has another little window open. Sorry, my mistake. I think just 2 comments on that. I think I have a client like work with the CEO and the team, the leadership team, and they have a very well-meaning new kind of org health person who just came in and said, we're all now using Monday, and like did not Monday.com like to manage shared work. Uh, and this is a small organization that has not done that before. And she did not at all tell them like why. Right. It was just like, here's the new tool, here's the new rule, and this is how it's going to be. And she's actually lovely and empathetic. So it wasn't like she was trying to be top down, but that's a
She just didn't
mistake
think of it.
people make is, okay, I hear that you're overwhelmed. I hear that you're having a hard time keeping track of tasks. Everybody must use Monday from now on, but never said the rationale and what's in it for you to do it. So there's that. And then there's some of the difficulties I'm seeing with the transition to that, many, but one that's standing out is there are some people who are like, I don't like doing everything async. I want to get on the phone. I want to have a meeting. I want to talk to other people. So there's just all of this tension around the way of doing the async. Not only is it not clear, we haven't made the distinction between what goes where and do I send it in email? Is it in the Slack channel? Is it what? But also people don't see what's in it for them, and they're mourning the loss of like picking up the phone and having the conversation, which is not efficient, but that's how they're used to doing it.
Right. Right. And every change in a way of working is disruptive, right? And it's going to be better for some people and worse for others based on their learning style, their processing speed, all of those things. And we should expect every time we introduce major change for it to get a little bit worse before it gets better. But that opportunity to notice that these things have not been enforced, mandated, they haven't been facilitated, you've just said, here's a tool. That is the worst possible way to make it go, because you get people going, well, you know what, actually, I'm going to track my time over here instead, because this is the way I do it. And then maybe I'll just put it in on Sundays, or, all of this drift that all of a sudden the information is not reliable, all that stuff, right? So attaching this to meaning, attaching this to what we're trying to do, and then giving teams those opportunities to have the conversation and make really detailed agreements, in the place where the organization hasn't laid it down for you, the team gets to say, this is our detailed agreement about how we do this. Or at least they should, in my opinion. So async, I specialize in meetings and decision-making. And oftentimes those bottom layers, the environment, the team definition, the work definition, the async, are the solution to a meeting problem, right? You can't avoid meeting if you don't have those other things in place. You have to talk to people. But when you get up into the real-time collaboration level, that can be designed too. And you can get very, very specific. You can, for example, let's say you're a sales team and your job is to sell consulting or facilitation services to a client. You can say, okay, when a client first calls us, this is exactly how we run that first meeting to be successful. And depending on whether they need to have more, we might run this meeting. And if they don't, we're going to go right into writing proposals. And oh, by the way, we've learned over time that we write our proposals collaboratively with our clients so that we're not doing any of this, baloney throwing things over the wall and waiting to see if they come back to us someday. So like that kind of thing, every part of that can be designed and flowed out. The more teams do this work, the better their meetings become. Any questions about meeting design or real-time collaboration that we're going to address in 3 minutes? Okay. So this layer, sales teams actually do a fairly good job. Senior executives in big companies do an okay job having some clarity about this. They definitely have some clarity about how they run their town halls or their meetings with the press. Boards and committees will sometimes do a pretty good job about this. Most real-time collaboration teams, most project teams, most innovation teams do a terrible job of this. They have very, very little going on here. Final layer of things that we can design. Yeah, Mike.
Why do sales teams do a good job?
Because they're
good at it.
Yeah. I don't know that they're all good at it, but I know they put focus on it. And it's because the conversations that they have directly lead to revenue, right? So if a salesperson has good meetings with clients, there is copious research that shows that they outperform other salespeople by at least 3x. And salespeople are motivated and incentivized based on results. Right? Bad meetings means lost clients, means lost jobs. And they don't get the bonus where they get to go to Hawaii. I got to work as a product marketing manager in a legal team at one point and go to the sales meetings, and they were always the best. Because like if you were working with engineering, the meeting was like in an ugly conference room with sticky notes. But if you met with sales, you went to Vegas. They put you up somewhere nice and you had steak and it was great. So it's a whole different world. The final layer that you can design, and the one that's least designed, is critical collaborative processes. So that you can have protocols for how you raise conflict. You can have protocols for how you raise concerns and give feedback. You can have processes for how you make decisions. And this is one of my areas of training and expertise is how do you establish frameworks that help everybody know what we do when we need to make a decision? That can be outlined. You don't outline what the decisions are. You say, hey, if we have decisions of this class, or we have a conflict that feels like this, here's how we handle it. The groups that do the best with this are highly evolved self-managed teams and mission critical teams. So you see people, emergency responders, firefighters, Navy SEALs, astronauts, they have all this stuff down. Most of the rest of us are pretty sloppy about it. So that's that final layer. Any questions on that before we move on? So there they are. So when you have a problem with something like trust, what do? One thing you can do is you can get the team together and have them talk to each other and build trust and share stories. And those are beautiful, wonderful things to do. And there are things you can change in the system that make it easier for people to trust each other. Makes it easier for them to know what's expected of them, how to do things in trustworthy ways. So that's the overview. Now we go into some stories about this and how to apply it. Any questions before we move on? Okay. Does it make sense?
Yeah, I have one question. This must have been written up somewhere in books and articles and that sort of thing. Or at least I hope so. Can you give us a citation or something where we can read more about this?
Yeah, I will. I'll actually in the next breakout I'll pull out the link.
Okay, great. Thanks.
And actually this is mine. This is my work. So it's Weitz V1 and it's fairly fresh. But I spent the last year and a half looking at, because I've got where all this work on meetings and working team agreements and decision making and whatnot. And I was looking at it and working with people in other disciplines going, sometimes the problem I'm trying to solve actually has a solution in the physical environment. It's not actually a problem of what's on the agenda or the question we ask. It's a problem of the fact that people can't see each other and they can't use the tools, or that they should never have been in a meeting in the first place and they need a place to put documents. Bye, Katerina. So I want to talk about I'm going to share a couple of my stories, and then I want you to have an opportunity to compare your own stories. Just sort of as a how I think about this playing out. And I'm going to contrast a couple of different organizations I've worked with in the past. So one is a startup, just getting started, right? What did that look like? Well, if I were to color in what they'd thought through and been intentional about, it would look kind of like this, right? So way down at the bottom, they said, okay, you have to work in the office. So that part of the environment was super clear. It was mandated. That's where you work. But, they weren't super clear about when and what kind of tools you should use and all that stuff. So we sort of showed up and we brought our own software. And, we spent an awful lot of time fighting over where to track tasks and, how to code and all of that kind of stuff. They were super clear, 100% mandated. This is your boss. This is your job. You report to that person, do what they say. There was no self-definition. There was no redefinition. It was all in the HR mandate when you got hired. And then when it came to the work, at the high level, there was a strategy and there were quarterly goals. And the different department folks would get together and agree on who was supposed to do what. And then every single department figured out how to track what they were doing in their own way. So some groups used Basecamp, some groups used Salesforce, some groups used sticky notes on the wall, and they all somehow magically came together here. Now, 20 people, startup, you're scrappy, you're moving, you don't really lock things down. Not actually a problem when there's only 20 people in that soup, right? Like that whole moving around thing, you can kind of talk to each other and figure things out through a whole lot of that. There's a lot of great research on where those barriers are, but just above 20, the talking to each other and just sort of figuring things out breaks down. And that's certainly what happened here. Never at any point that I was at that company, I was there for about 12 years, did any of this ever get defined. There was a whole big nada. All of that was delegated. So that was hard. And, that most companies that are new or young or small hit those points. and they have to iterate. So what's possible when you iterate? So this is one of my favorite companies to talk about. Anybody know about Zingerman's? Zingerman's. Oh, yeah, Mike, you know about Zingerman's? It's a
Of it,
collection.
yes, I've come across it as an example of something to emulate.
They're so great. They're a collection of food-based businesses started by these two guys. This guy, this tall guy here, he wrote several of those books up there. He's a self-proclaimed lapsed anarchist. And he's the kind of anarchist that's not like tear everything down, but build everybody up. He basically says every cook can govern. So they're radically self-managed, but they didn't start that way. They started as a messy deli. And they got to a point in the 90s where there was a massive downturn and they had to fix how they were working to survive it. So they brought in a system called the Great Game of Business. It's open book management is that particular methodology. And that's what you see when a lot of companies or teams hit those breaking points, right? They hit it and they get there and like, oh, we're 20 people, now we need to be 50 people. Or no, oh, we're 1,000 people, now we need to be 5,000 people. They will say, okay, we need to go out, we need to find a system. Agile. Many of the agile methodologies are systems like that. Design thinking has methodologies like that. And what they do is they grab it wholesale off the shelf and they put it into the environment. And those systems, open book management, OKRs, all of those things, EOS, tell you what happens at different levels of your environment. They tell you how to meet. They tell you how often to meet. They tell you how to organize your work, right? They put design elements in place. And that's cool because that's a big up level. All of a sudden you've got answers to how a bunch of these things are designed. That said, those answers are not tailored to you. They're giant general ideas that work pretty good in the absence of anything else. So what a company like Zingerman's does, they have had, 30 years now since they adopted open book management off the shelf and they put it in to iterate. And they iterate on all of these levels, and it kind of looks like this. They definitely tell people where you work and when you work because they sell food. They're a deli and a restaurant, and you kind of have to show up. But then they give all of their teams recipes for tailoring the job to them. So every team member and every team does some planning individually on when and how and where they're going to work specifically. They tell and mandate at the top level, this is how your role drives our success. At every level. That's part of the hiring process. And then they give them recipes for leading change. Zingerman's approach to change is by far one of my favorites on the planet. They have a very simple story-based framework that every single employee is handed that says, here's how you make the case for change in your job. Anybody can do it. And then they send it through the people who are impacted and will have basically their hands on the money in terms of making sure that it's okay. And then they can get their changes made. So they've had people come in who are like straight out of high school who say, hey, we need an automatic juicer. And they put together a case and by golly, they've got an automatic juicer. All kinds of fabulous things are possible because they tell them how to make it possible. So that's cool. Wrong way. So recipes for change. Work definition. At the top level, they say, here's our vivid vision. And here's how we use open book management. Open book is literally what it says. Every single person in the company can see all of the financials, all of the numbers at any time. They're literally on the wall for them to look at. And then each and every team and department chooses which critical numbers they're going to track. So the organization says we all track things and we track things in this way. And then the team chooses this is specifically what we track, is how we influence and make our way to the goals. But we're doing it on a board, just like the organization says we do. And they have this sort of delegated, sort of open way of bringing ideas to work. So how can we shift the way we're working? How can we shift what our goals are, or should we, right? So they have that in place. Async is also well defined. I'm not going to go through all of it, but they have prescribed very, very clear ways to run their quarterly and weekly meetings. So every week, every group in their collection of businesses gets together and looks at all of the numbers. Those meetings are magical. I got to sit in on a couple of them. They're super cool. And then they train. If you get into any management position in the company, you must go through meeting facilitation training. And they hand them recipes for running different kinds of meetings. So they know how to run an employee performance meeting. They know how to run a decision-making meeting. They know how to run a problem-solving meeting. They know how to meet with a vendor and a client, and that they're all trained. And then, of course, the teams themselves, beyond the weekly meeting, which is mandated, gets to choose however they need to meet to get their jobs done. Finally, I went the wrong direction again, I think. The very, very top level, and I don't think I put that in that slide, but all their decision making is very, very clear. They know the difference between consensus and consent and these other forms. And everybody in the company, and I talked to servers and I talked to leaders, said, yes, consensus is when we are in 80% agreement with the subject or content of a proposal and 100% ready to back it. And we all unanimously say that that's true. Like, how many places have you been where people just rattle off, this is what consensus is? So that's really, really cool. And this is kind of what it looks like there. So that's their Asian restaurant. This is the back end of the mail order part of the business. And because it's so successful and they've had so much time to iterate on it, this and this are pictures from people who've gone to visit them and then picked up their method as a way that they do their own business. So completely different companies. But it's a lot of design decisions at every level, iterated over time. So those are a couple of stories. You guys want to compare some stories of your own? Here's what I want you to think about. I think about an ecosystem, a collaborative ecosystem that you've worked in. And what in that system was enforced. Somebody on top said, this is how we do it. And if you don't do it, we'll correct that. What was facilitated and what was left up to everybody to figure out on their own, delegated. I'm going to give you, I'm going to put you into 2 groups of 3 and give you about 9 minutes to share and compare some of those stories and some of the questions that are coming up for you right now. Let's see, do we have 9 minutes? I'm going to give you 6 minutes to do that. Does that work for everybody? Cool. Welcome back. What came out of that conversation? What emerged?
I had one question about, and I this is more of a statement, but well, there's a good question embedded. We started talking a bit about, so when I was thinking about previous experiences and in nonprofits and in the social sector, and but also in spaces where things are delegated and not explicitly stated, how power beyond hierarchy, power, which could be moral authority too, right? Like who you look to, not just positional power, influences all of these things and really kind of constricts what is possible in some cases in ways that are not explicit. And it's not that we formally said, this is the way it's supposed to be, but you're taking a risk if you go in a different direction here. And just any thoughts you have when you think across the levels of the framework that you've shared.
Yeah, so that requires an immense bravery, right? To be able to say, hey, I'm noticing that we haven't actually been clear on this, and hoping that if we can be clear on this, it's more equitable, because it is, right? Like an agreed upon way to access power makes it possible for more people to access power, and it's not just power through personality, charisma, type A dominance, longevity. So that in the Canvas, actually, on the second page, there's a whole series of potential questions of things that might be designed. And in an environment like that, I might pick one or two and say, hey, I was noticing we don't have an agreed upon way on this. And you can scribe it to new people. Like, when we bring new people on, can we make this easier for them? Or like, I'm noticing the remote people aren't as clear on how to, whatever it is, like, make it the social benefit it needs to be to get past that, and get the agreements 2 or 3 at a time. What else emerged? Anything? Okay. Brian, you look like you had a thought, or were you just adjusting?
And I was adjusting now, but that the insight that Mike and I had probably will be that 6 minutes was not enough. So
Right? Right? Never is. So this is like, we mentioned to Mike, it's a fairly new tool, and I designed it because in the work that I do, often I'm brought in to solve a pinpoint problem that is actually tied up in all of the other problems, and can't actually be solved in the way that they've asked me to solve it, because you can't fix meetings if teams have 97 priorities and nobody knows who's doing what, right? Yes, your meetings will suck because your life sucks. So having access to many, many other wonderful professionals who are experts in all of these different areas, and having a way I can talk with teams about what they do and don't have, helps me do my job better. I also found that when I used this with a group of leaders, they would come with questions like, hey, I need to increase empathy on my team. And we'd say, well, here are all of the designable things you can do on a team. Who is got good empathy on your team, and what do you do to make that happen? And they told each other stories of, oh, well, we have great empathy because we do this in our Friday meeting, and we post this up on Wednesdays, and we have this conversation every 2 weeks. Those are designable actions that give rise and make space for empathy, as opposed to telling each other that we all just care deeply about one another and we have a culture of listening. Like, okay, great, I'll do that too. No, I'm going to do this Monday meeting thing. Great. So, Mike, for you and anybody else who wants to read, there's the Canvas again with some of the questions on the back, and the background work is on the labs. There that second link is all of the articles related to collaborative teaming that are on there, and all of the different resources. There's a ways of working that's for teams as opposed to organizational level design. And curious about your final takeaway, and then we'll get you out of here because we're at time. So if you are open to sharing, I'd love to hear.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you. One key thing that you think a team in your life needs to know that you picked up today. If anything.
I think I will. I actually, until I saw your this proposal, I wasn't aware of the ecosystem around team and the decision making and everything else that is involved that you presented today. So I'm actually going with it's not just about a meeting. There's more work to it. So I probably might be changing my approach to decision making and problem solving and everything that you mentioned today, taking into consideration this ecosystem around the team, the organization. So that's what I'm taking.
Cool. Cool. Anushka says, people take action, teams make work meaningful.
There was a lot that a ton that I got out of today's meeting, Elise. But one of the questions I have is, you mentioned that 20 people working together can kind of work it out without a whole lot of structural design. Above 20, it starts to break down. Can you mention any research or resources that speak to that?
It's been a while since I looked all that up, and I don't know how that's changed, right? Because the research the foundational research on all of that was back when teams were primarily co-located and culturally cohesive, right? Back before, it was a contractor and an AI bot and 5 people from different countries meeting online, sort of. So I don't know if that translates in exactly the same way. But I will go and look at see what I can find there. Obviously Dunbar's work is some of it, but that's even larger sets.
Yeah, I can look for it. That's of real interest to me. So I'll try to find some stuff too. But if you can share something, that'd be great.
I'll see what I can find. I know in that case, that's certainly been my experience, but that experience is not last 5 years experience. So, okay. Anything else that we'd like to ask or mention? Because we are officially at time.